Well, just back from the track yet again. It's 10-1 now, Singapore time. Completely lost track of time. What a day. Sergio Perez, absolutely brilliant. I mean, this was one of the best Grand Prix I've seen for a long time. Non-stop pressure. Charles Leclerc in your mirrors. Give me a break. I mean, this was unbelievable from Sergio. And he won it, in effect, with what he did in qualifying yesterday, in my view. That lap he got in right at the end to put him on the front row of the grid made all the difference. He then obviously had to make a great start, which he did, from the dirty side of the grid. But then when it's wet, as it was damp, the jury's out on which is the better side of the grid to be. It comes down to how much water there is on the white lines near you on a street circuit like that. And there's no advantage really to be on the so-called clean side of the road. In fact, you could say the opposite, because it's got rubber on it and you'd want to be on the grippier side. So Sergio made a perfect start and took the lead into the first corner. And then it started, of course. Then the pressure started. Charles Leclerc, who was on the pole, fractionally quicker than Checo in qualifying, had too much wheel spin. And you could say, well, that's unusual, isn't it? Because Ferrari usually make good starts. When the start is in the dry, and there's something like too much wheel spin, usually you can say it's the fault of the driver. When it's damp, there's no way you can blame Charles for that. That would be too much wheel spin on the white lines, and that was it. And you can say, I guess the race was over at that point, but it wasn't. It had just started, because this is Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, really quick car driver combination. This is Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. As I've said a couple of times, and as I said yesterday in the qualifying video, this circuit is perfect for Sergio Perez, as to some extent is Monaco, because his forte is how he loads up the rear tyre coming out of slow corners. That's where he's so good, and always has been. And providing he got in front, I said yesterday, it was going to be very, very difficult for anyone to overtake him, and that's exactly what happened. When the track dried and DRS came into play, and they're both on the medium slick at this point, I thought, there's no way Charles isn't going to pass him. And I guess everybody else did as well. But of course, this is Singapore. And even though there's that longish straight in the first sector, where Max memorably tried to outbrake Lando and ended up in the escape road, even though there's that section there, it wasn't long enough. And B, by then, Charles had been so into putting pressure on Checo at a restart with the slicks that he had slightly overcooked the heat build-up in the tyres, and he was getting quite a lot of oversteer on the critical left-hander before that section, after the turn one, in effect. And every lap he was doing one of these. I was chatting to him afterwards, and he said, the balance went right away, and that was the critical place. And it was, I suppose, I could say it's kind of odd that he didn't, therefore, make sure that he got at least one lap where he got it absolutely perfect out of there. But he said the balance just went away so much because he overheated the rears, basically, behind Checo. And when that happened, I say behind Checo, it's quite easy to overheat, for the tyres to go off sooner and to overheat more if you're the guy following the leader, because you've got debris, you've got all sorts of stuff going on. And that's what happened with Charles. He warmed up the tyres slightly too quickly, whereas Checo took 3 painstaking, incredibly nail-biting laps to get his slicks right up to the right operating cycle, which he did perfectly. No doubt, with Red Bull in his headset telling him to do that. We didn't hear that out on the radio, but that's for sure what was going on. And Charles just never got a clean exit from that last corner. By the time he was kind of on top of that, the tyres had gone away and the balance had gone away. And then there would be a moment where he'd run a little bit wide at a slow corner apex and he'd lose another tenth. And so it went on from there. So, and then early on in the race, I kind of got ahead of myself there, but early on in the race, when they were on the intermediates, again, the pressure was massively on Sergio Perez, because you're leading the race. The track grip is changing not only by the lap, but it's changing within the lap, because you've got the bridges in Singapore, which are, in theory, a little bit drier, even though there's quite a lot of water falling down. And then you go to this wet bit again. Some of the curbs were really wet, some weren't. It's very difficult if you're the leader of the race, trying to control the pace, if you like, not to leave a margin, particularly under braking, but at the same time to make sure that this red car behind you darting around in your mirrors isn't going to put its nose inside you. So, and that's what Perez did so well. And I've made the point several times that he is one of the best drivers, certainly on the grid at the moment, one of the best drivers of his era in terms of getting into a rhythm and being very, very difficult to overtake. He makes very, very few mistakes because the pivotal point of his lap is always these lovely acceleration runs out of slow corners. So he's totally focused on that. And if he's not making mistakes there, what is he going to do? He's just going to make a mistake, potentially under braking at high speed. But I thought that was the most impressive thing about Perez's drive today, was how good he was under braking at high speed when Charles was in the DRS and when he was pretty near to making a move. The only thing there that would have prevented that move, would have enabled that move to happen, would have been if Sergio had locked up and run a little bit wide, which is very easy to do if you're trying to brake as late as possible to stop the guy passing you. But he didn't. He just did it perfectly. And yeah, what can I say? It was kind of what I thought would happen. And I said so on a live stream quite recently that I thought Sergio would win here. And that was at the time when a lot of people were saying, no, Mercedes are going to be right up there and Ferrari have got a much better chance to win. And I made the point then, and I still stand by it, and I think that's part of the victory today, was that if you've got an incredibly efficient aerodynamic package, you can parlay that advantage into a number of different things that will help you around a street circuit. And it might be traction, it might be turn-in, it might be a little bit of a top speed advantage, it might be a number of things. But if you've got that aerodynamic advantage, in other words, you've actually got more downforce with which to play, the playing field is yours. And that's exactly how Red Bull handled it. And I thought, I say he kind of did it in qualifying because, as I said yesterday, it wasn't so much that they made a mistake on Max's fuel. It was that the 3 laps that Max might have been on the front row, he actually made the sort of mistakes that Perez wasn't making in sector 2, and he was coming out of the lap as a result. But he'd already put, if you like, used quite a lot of fuel doing a quick 1.5 or 2/3 of a lap. And that's where he ran out of fuel, because it's a long lap. And if you do that 3 times, which is what happened, then it's gonna hurt you. And that's where Sergio got the front row, because he didn't make those mistakes. And I said yesterday, he's not making mistakes under pressure on a circuit like this. And it was the same in the race. And we saw quite a lot of errors from Max. And he will say, well, where I was trying hard and did this and straight on here and all the rest of it. But I think if nothing else, it just showed how good Perez's drive was today and how good he was under pressure. And Charles gave it everything he had. I think the only mistake you can say for Charles, off the line obviously, but then, and I think it's worth saying here that I think if Charles had got the lead into the first corner, I think he probably would have won that Grand Prix, because I think Perez would have had the same problems trying to get past Charles. Maybe the Ferrari's tyres might have gone off sooner than the Red Bulls, and maybe Perez might have been in better shape at the back end of the race. But that's, who knows what the gap would have been at that point. So the race, in terms of Charles, the race was lost at the start. And then he tried everything he could. And he tried a little bit too hard when the restart was on with the medium tyre. There was a bit of talk afterwards, maybe it's come out by now, I don't know, but there was a bit of talk afterwards about Perez being under investigation for getting within the delta for the time of the safety car and being too slow behind the safety car. But even very impressive, wasn't it? I mean, the most he's going to get for that, if it happens, would be a 5-second penalty. And he beat him by more than 5 seconds anyway. So, and I don't blame Perez for that, because as you can see, he was up alongside the safety car telling him to go quicker. And this is because the tyre warmers have less energy this year. The medium tyre was 30 to 35 degrees cooler than its operating temperature when they were behind the safety car. That's how bad it was. And that's how critical the heating cycle was going to be once the safety car pulled in. And that's where, again, back end of the race, that's where Sergio just did the job so well in that heating cycle of the tyres. Again, with pressure from Charles, he didn't actually overdo it in sector 2. He left margin. He just built up to the pace. And then by the end, he was, going a second lap quicker. Absolutely superb. Couldn't have done a better job. I mean, that was as good a job in that Red Bull as Max Verstappen has done at any race this year, in my view. It was just a brilliant drive. So Charles was obviously upset, annoyed, but equally, he was near Perez, which is more than can be said for his teammate Carlos Sainz. I couldn't believe how slow Carlos Sainz was today relative to Charles Leclerc. I mean, what was he doing? There was nothing wrong with the car. And he was, I mean, this is a guy that supposedly is all about car control and the semi-wet and, you know, this and that. And this was a guy who looked pretty good on Friday when the track had no grip. But he was like a second a lap slower consistently throughout the race than Charles Leclerc. Yeah, he was on the podium. Yeah, Ferrari finished second and third, but I would call that second and 1.5 almost, because it was just a really weird drive. I mean, so weird that Lando was not far away from him at the end. Not in any way disparaging Lando, and a great day for McLaren. Excellent day for McLaren. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves on that, because I want to go on a bit more about Sergio Perez and how good he was. I saw him in the morning actually, walking into the track. Had a little bit of a chat to him. Just said, you know, great lap, Sergio, and he was obviously pretty focused. But I think I don't think that many people sort of took notice of his qualifying time yesterday. I think there was a lot of talk about Charles and a lot of talk about Lewis and how close Lewis was potentially going to be to a win today. And I think people sort of, oh well, you know, Perez sort of was there or thereabouts, but you could just see, you know, the less people talked about him, the more he was going to deliver, and that's exactly what happened. And full marks to him. I've said all along, there could not be a better guy to have in the other car alongside Max Verstappen than Sergio Perez. It is the driver combination of all time. It is just brilliant. So that was it. Carlos Sainz, very disappointing, I thought. Where was he all day? And then McLaren, excellent. Alpine were quicker in qualifying yesterday, but Lando got Fernando off the line and was ahead of him. And great call for both of them to come in under the virtual safety car, because they were the last to switch to slick. So that suddenly elevated Daniel Ricciardo up to 5th place or whatever it was. And he held it there forevermore, even on the soft tyre. So that was great. So both McLarens, 4th and 5th. Who would have thought? Good for Daniel on the soft tyre, 23 laps on the soft tyre. Just excellent. And Lando was brilliant. A lot of pressure from Max, as we know, and you know Max went for it when the tyres were cold, locked up the fronts big time, massive flat spot, went down, and Lando did well not to hit him actually. And that was Max, I think, just throwing everything at the race. Kind of the race was getting away from him a bit, and he was just throwing everything at it. And yeah, we saw that was quite a substantial error, really, given how cold the tyres were at that point and how good Lando how well Lando was driving and how late he was braking, even on cold tyres. I mean, just excellent. So McLaren with that new floor definitely made progress. And they've got a car now that they can start to use a little bit like Red Bull. If they've got an aero efficiency advantage, you can start to use that in a number of ways depending on the racetrack. And at a lower level, because they're not where Red Bull are in terms of that level of aero efficiency, but they've got more aero efficiency now, which is giving them a few more things with which to play, whether it be top speed or traction or turning, and that's always good. And Daniel, excellent, 4th and 5th. Aston Martin, very good too. Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel, 6th and 8th. Max got Vettel on the last lap, but it was touch and go, wasn't it? Because there was Vettel, Lewis, and Max, and Lewis couldn't get past Vettel, and Max couldn't get past Lewis for a while. They were just sitting there. So yeah, very good. Where have they been all year, I guess is what you're going to say. But at last, that was a very good day for Aston Martin, and Max on the soft tyre eventually got Vettel on the last lap, but it was, as I say, you know, quite close. And he didn't get fastest lap either, because Mercedes brought George in, and you know, he started from the pit lane and was the first to run on slicks to try and get information to give to Lewis. And he eventually set fastest lap on another set of softs right at the end. So so Max didn't get fastest lap either, and Lewis was 9th. And again, not a disappointing race, because with Lewis, for sure, he was on the absolute limit of what that car could do. But it was surprising, was it not, given how close he was in qualifying and how good and drivable the car appeared to be. And we're in Lewis-Hamilton type conditions, slightly damp, you know, a bit iffy on the curbs. It was surprising how quickly he fell away, even from Carlos Sainz, which is saying something, in the first phase of the race. And it never really got any better. When safety cars came out and they could reboot and the gap was obviously nullified, the second time around he stayed within touch of Carlos. But I think Mercedes and Lewis would have been expecting more than that. They would have been expecting Lewis to have at least had Carlos on a day when obviously Carlos wasn't on it, and to have been a very strong P3, and maybe not that far behind Charles and Sergio at any given moment, but he was struggling to stay with Sainz, and then he was struggling in traffic, and then he had that mistake anyway when he was behind Sainz, and I don't know, he just got blinded or whatever he did, and he just locked up and went straight on. Pretty amazing, really, that you can touch the barrier like that, come in, put on a nose, and keep going quite quick. It was 2 laps later, I think, that he did that. So it says, I don't know what that says, really. It says, good job by the barrier. Strong cars, I guess. But Lewis finished only 9th at the end, and after the promise of yesterday and all the talk about how this race was going to bring Mercedes into it, a disappointing day, unbelievably disappointing, and particularly as the bouncing was not great on the Mercedes when the track was dry, but when it was damp and the grip levels were lower, in theory the bouncing should have, well, it wasn't even there, and that's how much Lewis enjoyed his driving yesterday, but today wasn't really in it, was he? And very disappointing. Pierre Gasly had a bad day. Alpine fell away with both cars stopping. Ocon's engine appeared to blow. Not exactly sure at the moment what happened to Fernando, but he was, it looked like he was struggling to stay with Lando Norris in race conditions, and that was a very strong race for McLaren, and a very strong race for McLaren versus Alpine in terms of the championship, in the minor placings in the championship. So, yeah, all in all, I thought that was an enthralling Grand Prix. Great that we had a grid start, not a safety car start. And it was proof, I think. It was a little bit like that famous Alonso-Michael race at Imola, that if it's constant pressure like that. And here, unlike Imola, we had a lot of breaks in the race. We had intermediates to slicks, we had safety cars, we had virtual safety cars, or lots of things breaking it all up to reboot it all, but constant pressure. I can't think of anything more stressful than having Charles Leclerc in a Ferrari in your mirrors, and yet there was Sergio, just a model of consistency, and Charles would go quickly, Sergio would go a 10th quicker the following lap, then Sergio would back out of his tyres, Leclerc would back out of his tyres, then he would go quickly again, and it was just throughout the race like that. I thought it was a fabulous race, and amazing, really, that it happened here in Singapore, where Formula One's been away for 2 years. A lot of people probably have never seen a Singapore Grand Prix in terms of all the new Formula One viewers, but to see that race, I think they would have been. Well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because we're talking about how polarised Formula One's become. And is it that if your guy's out of it, we're not interested? If Lewis Hamilton's out of this race, nobody's going to watch, and none of the Lewis fans are going to watch? I don't know. But, the Max fans wouldn't have enjoyed that race either, I suppose. But for me, it was just, I'm a Charles Leclerc fan, I have to say, and I know him pretty well. But I just loved that. I thought Sergio's drive was just poetic almost. It was just superb. And I think Charles kind of was blown away by how good Perez was as well. I think it came down to just thinking, if I'm here long enough, the guy's bound to make a mistake, everybody else is. And yet he didn't. There was one lockup on the medium tyre when he hadn't got it fully up to temperature, but it wasn't bad enough to be a flat spot. And other than that, just I'm going to win this race and I'm going to win it well. So imagine now what this means for the Mexican Grand Prix. Imagine the crowd. Imagine the Mexican fans watching that race live. Imagine what this is going to mean. For Austin as well. There'll be a lot of Mexicans in Austin. So, yeah, anyway, I just left the track. It's the paddock area is just a massive forklift trucks and pack horses and everybody rushing off to the airport, and charter flights. There are 4 charters going to Japan, and it's just constant movement. Suzuka next weekend. You're going to ask me who's going to win the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka? I can't see any way in the world that Red Bull won't be unbelievably quick around Suzuka. I think, and probably be Max again, because it's such a great circuit with so many demanding corners, fast and medium speed corners. There aren't many corners where Sergio can be Sergio. Lots of corners where Max can be Max, particularly out of 1B into the S's, the top of the hill, going into Dunlop, down into the Degners. That's all Max Verstappen territory. Hairpin, yeah, it's pretty perfunctory these days. You can be offline through the hairpin and still be quick. Spoon will be Max. 130R is pretty line locked, doesn't mean that much. Braking for the chicane, the last chicane, Sergio will be good there, but by then, you know, the lap will be all over and it'll be Max's. So, yeah, they'll be really good. Ferrari will be, you know, where they will be, P3, P4 probably, maybe P2, maybe Charles ahead of Sergio. And then, I don't know, Mercedes appear to be about a half a second to about 6/10 quicker than McLaren right now. So you've got to assume that will be probably greater at Suzuka, maybe. I don't know, maybe not. So yeah, but that's what will happen, I think. But Sergio, yep, thought he'd win this one, and he did, and he won it beautifully. Congratulations to him and everybody involved.